Welcome to Cinemophile, where we bring you the best in independent, documentary, and foreign films, and we talk to the people who made them. I'm your host, Mike Caspar, and you can find out more about the program by going to cinemophilepod.com. Joining us today is award-winning documentary filmmaker Alexis Aggrey, known for such work as her Emmy Award-winning documentary Water's Edge, Black Watermen of the Chesapeake, and her Peabody Award-winning documentary 180 Days. Joining us today to talk about her latest work, Becoming Thurgood, America's Social Architect. It is the story of Thurgood Marshall, and it explores his life and his legacy. This visionary lawyer and civil rights leader became the first black justice of the United States Supreme Court. Drawing from rare archival recordings, personal photographs, and exclusive interviews, the film offers an intimate and timely portrait of a man who reshaped American democracy. Alexis, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm honored to be here.
Well, and I'm honored to have you because this is a wonderful documentary film on so many different levels, not only just to get to know Thurgood Marshall, because for a lot of people, he's kind of a history lesson that happened a long time ago, and that we're so much better off because we are better off because of the work he did. But it's kind of faded into that sense that this happened so long ago, and why is it still relevant today? Tell me a little bit about what got you started. What sort of became the reason that you wanted to do this?
Well, the sort of visionary of Maryland Public Television, Travis Mitchell, called me. He's been a fan of my work for a long time, and he made a commitment years ago that anytime there was a project that he thought I would be able to do well, he knows I like a complicated story, and I want to tell complicated stories in a way that is easily understood by all audiences. And he felt like I was the best person for this job. So actually, the idea didn't come from me. The idea came from Travis Mitchell when he called me on my birthday several years ago and said, I've got this amazing opportunity. What do you think about Thurgood Marshall? And my knee-jerk reaction was that I couldn't place his voice. I didn't know what he sounded like. I've done so many stories about seminal African-American figures and African diasporic figures, but I could not tell you what his voice sounded like, and it bugged me tremendously. So the first thing I did was look for recordings of his voice, and I found this recording at Columbia University in oral history that he recorded by Ed Edwin, and fell in love with the way that he told the story. He was so candid. You know, you think about this person that you colored in coloring pages during Black History Month, and you've seen on murals, and, you know, often things are named after him, but I didn't know what he sounded like, and I didn't know he was so funny. And I was like, oh, this is the film. This is the film. He should tell his story from his own words. And now we just need to figure out how to get permission to use this piece of audio. So that was the beginning of what became Becoming Thurgood.
I'm just curious in that first reaction. I mean, because this film goes into a tremendous amount of depth in terms of his history before he became a United States Supreme Court justice. So much of this is about what sort of informed him, how he became an educated man, how he fought these very Byzantine hurdles that he had to overcome in various states across the country to do what he did. But what did you know at that moment that he asked you to get into this? How versed in his history did you feel like you were?
Not terribly. I knew he attended Howard University, and I knew he attended Lincoln University. I also attended a historically Black college and university. So, you know, we all tend to learn who has gone to what school. And I knew about Brown, certainly, but that's about all I knew. I knew he was a Supreme Court justice, but I also thought of him as a sort of quiet Supreme Court justice, one that wasn't really in the headlines during my sort of formative years or during his life when we were alive at the same time. So I didn't know much. And for me, I wanted to understand Thurgood Marshall as a human being first. Some of the early things I read about him, I found later to be kind of oversimplifications of his personality. He's often spoken about like he was a rambunctious or troubled youth, but that wasn't really true. He was just from Baltimore, and he had a vibrato. He was quite bold and confident because of the very strong family that he came from, educated family that he came from that was interested in the pursuit of academics and education. And that created a really confident young man at a time when that kind of confidence was, I guess, seen as delinquent. But he wasn't a delinquent. He was actually a really gifted student, was very gifted at debate in high school and later in college. And I think that is the groundwork for what we know now as, America's first Supreme Court justice. So I didn't know much about him, but the more I could humanize him, the more I could read personal accounts of who he was as a young person, as a teenager, as a young adult, I just fell in love with how he had this zest for life and he lived a full life. You think about Supreme Court justices as kind of very stern, sleepy judges, but he wasn't that. He was gregarious and funny and bold and a revolutionary and brave. And so grateful I had the opportunity to tell his story.
Exactly as you described it is how it comes across in the film. And some of the things, when you break down what he was about in his accomplishments, I love this stuff about the foundational things about him in terms of law and understanding the law. I want to make sure I get to the right Charles Hamilton
Yes,
Houston. Let's talk about the influence because I think this is foundational to why he was such a successful litigator and how he was clear-eyed about what he could accomplish in doing that.
absolutely.
So let's talk about the influence that Charles Hamilton is Hamilton Houston. Do I have that right?
Yes,
Yeah,
Charles Hamilton Houston,
yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
In the subject matter experts interviews that you see on camera, but also in the pre-interviews, we kept hearing over and over and over that they weren't activists. They were lawyers. Charles Hamilton Houston was a lawyer's lawyer, and he created lawyers that were poised on using the Constitution to bring about equality and equal protection of the law for all people. It wasn't the Civil Rights Project that was being sort of engineered at Howard University through the vision of Charles Hamilton Houston was about perfection because he wanted to make sure that there was no opportunity to debate or question the laws that they were able to change or interrupt. So he required perfection. He required legal briefs, not to, this is before computers. This is typewriting. This is typewriting and liquid paper. And he didn't believe in liquid paper. There was no liquid paper. You make a mistake, you start again. And perfection was the requirement. So for every legal brief, that was the level that was required of them, not just as students, but later they brought that into the way that they practiced. And Thurgood Marshall believed in what Charles Hamilton Houston was building at Howard University. And it's why they were so successful. They were able to go into the segregated South and litigate, not to change hearts and minds, but to apply the law equally to all human beings. And while sometimes in the film, Cheryl Eiffel says, people think of civil rights as goodies for Black people. And she's like, it's not that. It's a democracy project. It's a democracy project. And this is to make sure that we all have equal protection of the law. And that is the work that Charles Hamilton Houston inspired those cohorts of lawyers that he was able to be the dean for. And later, Thurgood Marshall sort of took that baton on to the Legal Defense Fund. And it's still today, the Legal Defense Fund is one case at a time, whittling away at trying to hold America to its highest ideals and to make sure that the Constitution is equally applied to all American citizens.
And one of the things that he instilled in him was that, as you mentioned it, but I think it's worth reiterating, and that is use your talent to improve the lives of others. The power to transform is in the law. It
It's
is,
in the
it,
law.
it's in the law. It may not be in the hearts of all, but it is in the law. And, I'm just going to sort of wander off a little bit
You're
here,
fine.
in that to me, the original Constitution the best parts are aspirational, but there's a lot
Yes.
in there that are straight up racism.
Yes.
There's straight up segregation.
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely.
so whenever I hear, and this is me editorializing, whenever I hear people talk about their legal perspective as originalism, it scares the shit out of me
It should. It
because they're
should.
telling me that original document was pretty damn racist. It is specific in its racism. And so, but it's the aspirational part of the Constitution that they leaned into. And this is
That's
the
right.
part, hold them accountable for what they said they wanted, not what they
That's right.
actually wrote in the
Wrote in
Constitution.
the Constitution.
You're
But
right.
it's why the document is a living document. It's why there's an
Exactly.
inability to amend the document, because the reality is that even though the framers were mostly, enslavers and mostly white, more all white males, the reality is that their desire and the ideals set forth in the Constitution are what make America America.
Yeah.
The idea of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness is,
Which we took from the French, which we
right?
embraced. All these things are great. I'm not dismissing them or trying to be minimalist about it. We embraced them. We said that's what we want, and we're going to hold those people to account for not
Count.
following
That's
through.
right.
Right.
That's right. That's right.
I just want to quickly remind our listeners that we are speaking with Alexis Aggrey. She is the director of this wonderful documentary film that will be premiering on PBS called Becoming Thurgood, America's Social Architect on September 9th. There's so much here to talk about, but I want to jump way ahead. I mean, we
Sure.
can talk about Brown, the Kansas Board of Education case and how important it was, and it was fundamentally important in terms of setting in motion so much of what we've come to know as civil rights legislation. The 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments are still being chipped away at as we speak. All of
Literally.
these things, this is a living, breathing history that we still need to be fortifying and we need to be better.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think most Americans don't have a really solid understanding of the freedoms that we enjoy today. I think in the research for this film, one of the things that Gilbert King and I had a lot of conversations about are these ideas around due process and these ideas around being Mirandized and coerced confessions, and that these are not liberties that just existed because of the Constitution. These are things that were fought, that were amended, that were undergirded by lawyers that were brave enough to challenge the system. That I can't imagine in 2025 being beaten within an inch of my life and that confession being legal.
I
But
had
the
no,
reality
yeah, I had
is
no
that,
idea. Well, this is until the mid 60s, right? Wasn't that it?
yes,
The mid 60s, you could be
yes,
beaten almost to
you
death.
could be beaten to death and that confession would be absolutely usable and okay to convict you. And I think we think about our rights. I think as Americans, as a young person, we're often like, I'm an American. This is wrong. And well, the reality is that the things that we think of as absolutely wrong and completely unacceptable are pretty recent in our history, and maybe not in my lifetime, but certainly in my parents' lifetime. So yeah, I mean, I think the reality is that most Americans don't know that, so they don't appreciate
Yeah.
the work that civil rights activists, that lawyers did to make sure that there's equal protection under the law for all people.
And you hear that refrain to this day. Are we still talking about this? Why are we still talking about this? Didn't we, this, that, and the other thing? And no, we didn't get it, apparently. Somebody didn't get the memo because we're still doing this.
Yeah.
For all the and okay, so there's Board of Education. I love the end near the end when you I have mixed feelings about Lyndon Johnson, but there are
We
times,
all
yes,
we all do.
but I have moments where I want to say he's one of the great American presidents of the 20th century because there are things like what he did with Thurgood Marshall and other things, Medicare,
Absolutely.
signing the civil rights legislation. There's a lot of things that he did well.
Voting.
Voting
Yes.
rights, exactly.
Yes. Yeah.
And then there's some others, but
Yeah, I've
yeah.
listened to quite a few presidential phone
But
calls
yeah,
that
that's
have
true. Yeah, that's
curled my
true.
toes.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. I want to talk about Smith v. Alford and why that is such a important, and it was called in the film his greatest win. Why is that?
Smith v. All Right is an important case because I think we think about voting in a blanket way. We think about the 1965 amendment that or Voting Rights Act that allows all people to vote, the ability to vote in federal elections. But what we don't think about is the equal application of that rule in states. And what Smith v. Allwright guaranteed is that you could not make your own rules, like all white primaries. And a situation in Texas, Smith v. Allwright, the case specifically, spoke about only allowing white voters to vote in primaries. Well, if you can't vote for your political party and you can't pick your candidate, then by the time we get to the polls, the choice has already been made.
Yeah.
There is no other choice to make. If a segregationist on both sides and both parties is elected in the primary, then the only option you have is a segregationist versus a segregationist. And the reality is that that wasn't. And for Marshall, that was a really important case. I don't think he thought he was going to win it. I think the reality of that sort of, I keep my refrain, the equal protection of the law for all citizens is something that Thurgood Marshall often talked about chipping away. It was one case at a time. But that was a really seminal case because it made a big change. And the reality of allowing Black voters to now vote in primaries meant that it's a different pool of candidates. And candidates have to speak to the constituency very differently because now these voters are allowed to vote. And I maybe can't proudly proclaim that I'm a segregationist if I know I want to get the majority of the vote for my party. So
And
I think it's a really important case. And we often take for granted sometimes voters only vote in the federal elections and they forget about the local and small elections and state elections that affect them the most. Those are the
yeah,
most important elections to participate
yeah,
in.
that old thing, all politics is local, is an
Yeah.
embodiment of what that is. What you're talking about. But lest we sleep on this issue, lest we sleep on not continuing to guard against institutional racism,
Yep.
real life racism. Increasingly, political parties have gerrymandered districts so much
Oh,
now. They
yes.
continue to do that to sort of boil it down to, and now we have a situation where who wins the primary is in all likelihood, and barring something extraordinary, going to win the election now.
Absolutely.
The gerrymandering is another kind of road to a segregated society. We've been flirting with this for a long time in the interest
Yeah.
of political power in one particular party dominating another. And we have lost sight of the reasons why we have primaries and general elections and to be open to everyone. We're heading back in that direction that we don't want to be in.
We are. And you brought up something earlier about LBJ, about Lyndon Johnson. And in my family, we often talk about his presidency as complicated, but complicated. But I think what made him a really powerful president and a president for all of America, not just rich America, is that he grew up poor and he understood the plight of poverty and that the socioeconomic struggle, certainly at the end of Dr. King's life, became his loudest rallying cry
Yeah.
was that we have to change the socioeconomic situation for all of Americans. Because the reality is that there is a difference between growing up privileged and there is a difference between growing up in poverty. So you don't appreciate social services if you've never needed them.
Right.
You don't understand the need for community, people with a little more helping those with a little less,
Right.
unless you've been the person with a little less.
Right.
It seems annoying or inconvenient. When I think about voting, I often think about the division isn't racial. It's the haves and the have-nots.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
folks that understand the struggle for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and what that looks like when you don't have as much as others. And
Yeah.
I think Thurgood Marshall really understood that. I think LBJ really understood that, and that's what bonded them as friends. However complicated, folks think about LBJ, I think that's what bonded them as friends, is that they understood what the picture of America looked like, not just for those that have and the rich and business owners, but those that don't have and desire to have a little bit more and have
Yeah.
aspirations for more.
Well, and I would remind our listeners that Dr. King was heading for the People's March, the Poor People's, I mean,
Oh, yes.
the
Poor People's Campaign.
Poor
Yes.
People campaign
Mm-hmm.
in DC just a few weeks before he was assassinated.
Absolutely.
That's where he
Absolutely.
was going, the Poor People's Campaign.
Mm-hmm.
And I often think you're absolutely right. The division in America is rich and poor. It's becoming increasingly a part of the political landscape. And beyond. And I'll just want to leave you with one last kind of topic I want to talk about, which was Thurgood Marshall's reflection on the impact that his work was having on the people as he was leaving these towns and these places where he had
Mm-hmm.
worked, knowing full well that these people were going to bear the brunt of the reaction, the racist reaction to his work. I thought that was beautiful. I was really taken by that part of the film.
I'm so grateful his son John participated in this documentary, because he was able to give us sort of first person from Marshall's voice. I mean, he talks about it in the oral histories that we listen to and that we use in the film, but hearing him reflect in that way with his son, his youngest son, John, I thought was really impactful. It's important because we think about him as brave, and we think about, this idea that, the Molotov cocktails coming out in the front and I'm running out the back, but that's someone's home. Someone opened their home for the folks for LDF to come and stay there. And people died. When they went down to Florida for the Groveland case, the reality is that the lawyers that were already down there had already been attacked. He was going into what he already knew was hostile territory, and he went anyways. And it's important that he went anyways, because without that case and cases like that, we would not have due process and equal protection under the law.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the bravery of all of those named and unnamed individuals that were brave enough to look that type of hate and vitriol in the face, allow it to not even be a consideration. They moved around. When he would come down for cases, they wouldn't stay in the same place 2 nights in a row because it was so dangerous. And to think about that, and to think about the people's homes that said, oh, we know this is dangerous, but come anyways, come stay here. It's okay, we'll protect you. One thing we learned, we didn't put in the film, is that he became a Mason. And the Masons is this organization that is both Black and white. What we know about the Masons is that it transcended racism. It, even in the time of enslavement, if a Mason saw your ring and you were being lynched, they wouldn't allow you to be lynched. And we have heard these accounts over and over and over again about these organizations, and whether or not the white Mason really was a racist or not for me to comment on or have a strong opinion about, but we know that people's lives were saved. We know that the Masons protected him in these towns. And I think about that bravery of those men that, put their lives on the line to keep him safe.
Is that where the phrase Freemason comes from?
Yes, yes. So the
Is that
Prince
right?
Hall Masons, yeah, the Prince Hall Masons are the African American Masons. They wrote to England or something and chartered their own hall, their own Masonic hall. And so when you hear Prince Hall Masons, those are often the African American Masons. And Thurgood Marshall was a Prince Hall Mason.
Who knew?
I
That's
know there
am
was so much. This story was so rich; it could have been 16 hours, but they only gave me one. So
Well, you did a great job with
thank you.
the hour that you had to tell this story. And I'm trying to think, has there been a narrative film about Thurgood Marshall of any note?
There has. Chadwick Boseman plays him. It's called Marshall.
Oh,
The
okay.
family has been very private. Thurgood Marshall was He believed in making sure that there was never an instance of impropriety. So when he ascended to the bench, he stopped going to church. He did not want there to ever be an instance where someone could ever say that they influenced the decision, or some sort of money influenced his jurisprudence. And he took that very, very seriously. And because of that, his family became extremely private, often not participating in documentaries or granting permission for books and films and things like that. And I am so grateful that his granddaughter, Cecilia L. Marshall, who sits on the board of the Legal Defense Fund, took the seat after her grandmother, also Cecilia Marshall, passed away a couple of years ago. And it's just because of this sort of new generation of the Thurgood Marshall Foundation that we're allowed to hear these stories, because for years, Marshall was like, that's not for people to know. I don't want there to ever be a question of impropriety.
It calls to question just how much he gave up of his, the rest of his life, and outside of what he was doing.
Yes.
Amazing. There's so, again, I could spend another hour 16 hours talking to you about the Lincoln College man, the Lincoln men. I love that. Langston
Lincoln
Hughes.
men.
I mean, there's a whole thing there.
Kwame Nkrumah. Yeah. I mean, yeah.
Absolutely.
Lincoln being the Princeton of HBCUs back then was a big deal. And thank goodness for Langston Hughes being such a sort of mentor for the younger students like Marshall. And Cap Calloway was a Lincoln man. There are so many sort of greats that come from that tradition, that long tradition
of historically Black colleges and universities. Absolutely. By the way, that reminds me, working with Stanley Nelson, who's done his own documentary series on a lot of issues, especially the history of Black universities and colleges. So yes, you worked with a great team. I want to just throw on Stanley.
The team was amazing. Stanley, I can't wax poetic enough about Stanley. I was nervous to work with him. I wasn't sure, would he dictate to me, tell me this is how we're going to do this and whatever. And he didn't. He was like the mentor that you always dreamed you had. He was so encouraging. His notes never disrupted or uprooted the work that we were doing. They always enhanced it and made it better. And in every instance, Stanley, we went to annual meeting in May a couple months ago. And anytime people were like, congratulations on your film, he was like, well, actually, I'm the executive producer, but the director, Alexis, is right. He was just so gracious. And I'm so grateful for, his willingness to work with me in that way. He didn't have to. He's so prolific, such a giant, and someone that I absolutely looked up to. But he really rolled up his sleeves and allowed this to be collaborative, and very grateful for that.
So great. So wonderful. Well, again, Alexis Aggrey, thank you for your work becoming Thurgood, America's social architect. The life and times and the history around him and the people who were such an important part of his life story. And thank you, we'll throw up Travis Mitchell as someone responsible for putting you onto this project and following through. And I look forward to more. I hope you are working on many other projects.
I am. Stanley and I are cooking something up right now. So yes, more soon, more soon.
Well, Stanley's been kind enough to come on the program a couple of times, so I've had an opportunity to talk with him. So congratulations on all of it. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
You have been listening to Cinemaphile with Mike Kaspar, the place where you will hear from the best in independent documentary and foreign filmmakers. Please check out our previous interviews as well as upcoming interviews and special programming by going to cinemaphilepod.com. We are also available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube, searchable under Cinemaphile with Mike Kaspar. Until next time, thank you for listening.